Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into the velvet corridors of rumor, the kind that cling to walls thick with centuries of candle soot and whispers. You're not just listening to history, you're wandering it, barefoot on cold flagstones, breathing in the faint scent of beeswax polish and someone's last desperate prayer. The palace at night isn't silent, it breathes. Curtains sway in drafts from unseen passageways, and somewhere far off, a door creaks with the guilty slowness of someone who does not wish to be caught. You probably won't survive this if you go poking in the wrong room. But for now, you're just a shadow among shadows, listening. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and the local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're all tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass a painted screen depicting hunting stags, the eyes of the animals following you, a little too knowingly. Beyond it, voices murmur in the half-light. A lady in waiting leans close to a silver-haired courtier, their heads bent so tightly together they look like a single figure with two faces. She was seen again, the woman breathes, after the third bell, in the gallery. The courtier chuckles without mirth, glancing toward a closed set of double doors. Historians still argue whether these late-night sightings were innocent strolls for air or something more calculated, meetings with envoys who never came by day. You slide closer, staying behind the thick folds of a tapestry that smells faintly of lavender and dust. Down another corridor, you hear the clink of spurs. The guard's torchlight flares along the ceiling beams, picking out carved roses and griffins. The designs seem to grin at you in the flicker. Somewhere in this twisting maze of stone and timber, the queen's apartments lie sealed behind heavy locks and heavier expectations. Officially, she sleeps. Unofficially, well, that's why these corridors hum with life when they should be still. A rat darts out from the skirting board, and you nearly trip. History is glamorous, except when it's not. As you steady yourself, you catch sight of a small scrap of parchment wedged between the planks. It's no larger than a coin, but the hurried scrawl on it is clear. Midnight, East Gallery. The ink is still fresh, the tail of the Y smudged as if folded in haste. You keep moving, your footsteps swallowed by centuries of worn rugs. From the next turn, you glimpse a shadow crossing a patch of moonlight. It lingers just a moment too long before slipping into a side door. You imagine the scene inside, polished tables, a decanter of something strong, two figures leaning close over maps or marriage contracts. Every whispered word here might be the difference between war and a wedding. Factually speaking, many medieval courts thrived on rumor as much as on grain and taxes. Information was currency, and a well-timed whisper could change the balance of power faster than any sword. Quirkily, there are records of entire rooms in certain castles being designed solely to carry sound more effectively, stone corridors that acted like gossip highways. You're walking through one now, your own ears catching fragments that seem to slide toward you on the cold air. Poisoned figs, not yet, her brother's ship. The further you go, the more the palace feels alive in its own right, sighing and shifting under the weight of secrets. Behind a half-closed shutter, a candle gutter flames, casting light on a carved emblem. Two entwined serpents. It's an old family crest, belonging to a house officially exiled decades ago. Yet here it is, glowing in the dark, like it never left. At the corridor's end, you find yourself before a narrow staircase, spiraling down into the unseen. You hesitate. Above you, the faintest rustle. Fabric against fabric, perhaps silk. A giggle follows, cut short, as though someone remembered where they were. You step aside, flattening into the wall, letting the sound drift past. You've learned quickly. Here, survival isn't about what you know, but about knowing when to appear deaf. When you finally move again, you pass a polished mirror. It reflects you dimly, as if centuries of candle smoke have clouded the glass. For a heartbeat, you could swear another figure stands behind you, just out of reach, watching with patient interest. You blink, and it's gone. Only your own sleepy-eyed face remains. The night in the palace isn't over. The corridors still hum. The whispers still weave themselves into nets, catching truths and lies alike. And you? Well, you've only just stepped into the game. You drift deeper into the palace's veins, where the air tastes faintly of starch and perfume, and the hush is so complete you can hear your own breath. Ahead, a narrow door stands ajar, revealing a spill of pale fabric on the floor. You slip inside and find yourself in the queen's sewing chamber, or at least the one everyone believes is used for innocent embroidery. In the center, a hoop rests on a cushioned stool, the silk taut under a frozen half-finished pattern. At first glance, it's just flowers, roses curling in delicate loops framed by ivy leaves, but your eyes catch the rhythm in the stitches, the deliberate repetition that isn't quite aesthetic. You lean closer. The petals curve like half-letters, their spacing forming symbols you've only seen in codebooks. The message hides in plain sight, disguised as beauty. Historians still argue whether such textile codes were widely used or just fanciful legend from spy novels of later centuries. But there's enough evidence. A few preserved doublets, a bishop's stole with suspiciously off-pattern thread to make you wonder how many secrets were smuggled in hems and cuffs. And here, under the queen's own hand, the idea feels less like theory and more like fact. Beside the stool, a basket overflows with lace, white, cream, and a scandalous crimson. You pick up a piece, running it through your fingers, feeling the fine prick of thread knots at uneven intervals. A quirky truth. Lace makers in certain regions wove signatures into their work, tiny flaws or flourishes that identified them to those in the know. Imagine an entire clandestine network run on bobbins and pins. You glance toward the windows where the moonlight spills through shutters and turns the lace into spiderwebs. On the table, an ink pot sits half open, the nib beside it still damp. You recognize the smell, not just ink, but the faint, acrid tang of lemon juice. Invisible ink, ready for letters that look like harmless inventories of ribbons and gloves until heated over a candle. A floorboard near the wardrobe groans. You freeze, watching a shadow stretch across the wall. A hand appears first, slender, ringless, then an arm carrying a folded square of cloth. The seamstress, perhaps, or someone borrowing the disguise. She doesn't see you in the deeper shadows. She moves directly to the hoop, slips a new stitch in, then plucks 3 threads from the crimson lace and tucks them into the fold of her cloth. Without a word, she slips out again, the door closing without a click. You move to the hoop, noting the new stitch, a looped knot, subtly different from the rest. It wasn't for decoration, it was a reply, the lace an envelope, the threads the message. You feel a shiver, not from cold, but from the awareness that this room is less a place for sewing than a postal hub for matters the crown pretends not to notice. Factually, queens and highborn ladies were often at the center of diplomatic correspondence. But in a time when their official voices were muted, they found quieter, more inventive channels. Here, each stitch is a sentence, each fold a paragraph, and each finished him a dispatch that might travel hundreds of miles without a single word on paper. You trace the unfinished design, wondering where the rest of the pattern leads, perhaps to the falconer who trades messages with his birds, or to the chapel where candle flames hide more than light. Your fingers linger on the fabric, feeling the tension in the thread, tight, deliberate, and holding more than one life in place. Behind you, the moonlight shifts. The pattern in the lace glows faintly, as though it knows it's been read. The awe grows warmer as you follow the faint, sweet smell of straw and feathers, slipping past a low archway into the royal aviary. The space is long and narrow, lined with wooden perches and wicker cages, each holding a bundle of gleaming eyes and sharp beaks. The cooing of doves mingles with the restless scrape of talons on wood. In the half-light, the queen's falconer stands with his back to you, a broad figure wrapped in a leather jerkin, a heavy gauntlet on his left hand. Upon it, a peregrine blinks slowly, its silver-banded leg catching the light. The falconer murmurs to the bird, not the soft nonsense people use for pets, but a rhythmic cadence, almost like reciting instructions. Historians still argue whether messages were truly sent by falcon, or if the idea is a romantic exaggeration of carrier pigeons' proven skill. Yet here, the evidence feels alive. A rolled scrap of parchment is bound to the falcon's leg with red silk, the knot small and precise. You shift your weight, and a floorboard betrays you with a creak. The falconer turns, his eyes narrowing, but he doesn't shout. Instead, he motions you forward as if you're expected. Up close, his face is weathered, his beard shot with grey. "She flies tonight," he says, nodding at the bird. "No hunting, only truth." He turns toward a low table, where a scattering of feathers lies like discarded punctuation. He picks up a strip of cloth embroidered with what looks like a decorative border, but the stitches form an unmistakable pattern, a cousin to the coded sewing you saw in the queen's chamber. You watch as he folds it into a pouch and fastens it to the bird's harness. Quirky fact: some medieval falconers trained their birds not just for sport, but to recognize certain scents, lavender, rosemary, even cloves, so they could seek out familiar handlers miles away. The queen's falcon smells faintly of rosemary oil, the same scent that lingers in her private rooms. The falconer steps toward an open-slit window, the night wind breathing in. Far below, the palace gardens glimmer under moonlight, their paths pale as spilled milk. He raises his arm and the falcon launches, slicing the air in silence. You follow its shadow until it vanishes into the dark, carrying its secret in muscle and feather. "Fastest way to the coast," he mutters, as if to himself. You glance at the rolled parchment left on the table, too thick to be a duplicate. Before you can ask, he scoops it up and tucks it inside his jerkin. "Not for you," he says, not unkindly. The aviary quiets. The other birds shift, sensing the absence of their swiftest member. Somewhere outside, you hear the faintest cry, like a thread snapping in the distance. You leave the falconer to his work, the smell of straw and oil following you out. Another secret is in flight, and you suspect its landing will change more than just the course of a hunt. The corridor curls toward the queen's private dressing quarters, where the air is thick with the scent of rosewater and something sharper, metallic beneath the sweetness. You slip inside, the hush broken only by the faint drip of wax from a candelabrum onto a silver tray. The room is a theater of transformation. Polished mirrors lean at careful angles, gowns in shades of midnight and ivory hang like slumbering figures, and on the long vanity rests an army of tiny glass bottles. Some are clear, filled with oil that catches the light like honey. Others are opaque, their contents hidden from curious eyes. One bottle in particular draws you, a slender vial carved with a swirling pattern, its stopper sealed with crimson wax. You've seen enough court inventories to know it's not perfume. The wax bears the crest of an apothecary, famed for his cosmetics, and whispered about for his poisons. Historians still argue whether certain medieval queens were complicit in subtle poisonings or merely victims of paranoia. The truth is hazy, blurred by the convenient deaths of rivals and the ease with which scented balms could be doctored. You lift the vial, and the faintest whiff of its contents clings to the air, spicy, warm, with a bitter undercurrent that makes your tongue twitch. On the vanity, a shallow dish holds face powder, its pale surface dusted with flecks of gold. Quirky fact: in the 14th century, some powders contained crushed pearls for luster, which, while fashionable, could also be toxic if applied daily. You run a fingertip through it, feeling the grit, imagining how it would catch the candlelight on the queen's skin. and how it might sink into her blood over time. A sudden rustle from the wardrobe draws your attention. The door opens just enough for a hand to slip out, depositing a small pouch onto the vanity. The hand vanishes, and the door clicks shut. You untie the pouch and find tiny glass ampoules inside, each filled with liquid of a different hue: amber, emerald, smoky grey. No labels, no explanations. Your gaze drifts to the mirror where you catch a fleeting reflection, someone's eye, watching from the crack in the wardrobe before disappearing again. You set the pouch back, heart ticking faster now. Factually, perfumes and powders were an intimate part of court life, and a queen's attendants controlled who touched them, mixed them, or applied them. In the wrong hands, the same rose oil that soothed the skin could inflame the lungs. You wonder which scents the queen wears to banquets, and which she saves for private audiences. You leave the dressing chamber with the taste of clove still ghosting the back of your throat, unsure if you've just inhaled beauty or danger. You move toward the west wing, where the corridors narrow and the tapestries hang closer, as if eavesdropping. The faint clatter of wooden pieces draws you to a small antechamber, lit by a single lantern. Inside, a carved chessboard rests on a low table between two chairs. The game is in progress. White queen advanced, black king boxed into a corner. But there's no sign of the players. You circle the table, noting the mismatched set. Half the pieces of ivory, half onyx, each bearing minute differences in carving. One rook wears a crown it shouldn't. A knight's horse has the initials of scratched into its base. They feel more like markers than mere ornaments. Historians still argue whether certain nobles used chess as a coded meeting format, where moves on the board corresponded to plans, troop placements, or even dates. The debate lingers because written records are scarce, though oddly, many political alliances seem to have been sealed after friendly games. You crouch, touching one of the pawns. Its head twists off with a soft click, revealing a tightly rolled scrap of parchment inside. You don't unfurl it. Footsteps are coming. Two figures enter, a man in a doublet, rich enough to pay for a small army, and a woman draped in velvet, her hood pulled low. They take seats opposite each other without a word. He moves a knight forward. She immediately answers with her bishop. Neither seems to notice you in the shadows, or perhaps they've decided you're part of the furniture. The man chuckles. As we agreed then. His fingers hover over the pawn you touched earlier, but he leaves it where it is. The woman reaches for her queen, sliding it with deliberate slowness into a position that would end the game in 3 moves. Quirky fact: some medieval chessboards were designed with hidden compartments under certain squares, perfect for slipping in tokens, seals, or tiny scrolls. This one's underside bears faint scorch marks, perhaps from a candle flame waved under it to reveal invisible ink. The game continues, their conversation nothing but murmurs and half-smiles. A toast to the future of 2 houses comes mid-match, though no wine is poured. You suspect the victory here isn't about the board at all. It's about the message traded, the unspoken pact hidden beneath rook and pawn. You slip out as the woman tips her king, conceding, and the man pockets the piece. The sound of it rattling softly against something inside his sleeve follows you down the hall like a distant warning. The chapel is a hush wrapped in stone, a bowl of night where sound collects and settles. You keep to the shadow of a pillar where the candlelight can't quite reach, and watch the choir stalls breathe like sleeping ribs. A single wick burns in a red glass lamp before the altar, swimming in oil that flickers with gold. Somewhere behind the screen, a door sighs, and a figure in a black veil glides out, small, deliberate, with the brisk grace of someone who has done a great many things at unholy hours. She is a nun, or wearing one like a costume. Her hands are bare, no ink stains, no calluses from farm tools, just narrow fingers that know how to hold delicate things. She pauses, listening, then moves to the side chapel where the reliquaries sleep under embroidered veils. You drift after her, your footfalls crushed to silence by centuries of wax and prayer. She kneels as if to pray, but her eyes flick to the hinge on a gilded box shaped like a saint's arm. You've seen these in treasuries, bone slivers cradled in gold, but this arm opens too easily. Inside, instead of bone, a long folded strip of linen waits. The edges are hemmed in a crimson lace that looks suspiciously familiar. You remember the sewing room's looped knot, that single stitch that hummed like a stage whisper. The nun slides the linen free, and something ticks in your chest like a clock being wound. Historians still argue whether cloistered women served as couriers for royal correspondence, or whether such stories are just embroidered scandal. Yet, the evidence likes to peek through. Monastic houses had scriptoria, libraries, and safe roads. Queens donated altarpieces. Abbesses wrote letters to kings in a prose sharp enough to cut cheese. It doesn't take a leap to imagine an errand or three under cover of devotion. The nun keeps the reliquary open, lifts the linen to the candle. Nothing appears, at least not to ordinary eyes. She doesn't heat it, not like the lemon ink letters in the sewing room. Instead, she bends close, sniffing the hem with the care of a perfumer. Rosemary, faint as a memory, your falconer's calling card, and underneath it, clove, the dressing chamber's dangerous whisper. Scents stacked like layers of authority. The bird said where, the balm said who. Your skin prickles. Codes don't always need alphabets. Sometimes they travel by nose. She refolds the linen and slips it into a flat leather case hidden under her scapula. From a pocket, she draws a wax tablet and stylus, scratches 3 short lines, then rubs them out with her sleeve, practicing, or praying in shorthand. With a motion quick as a wink, she palms a small parcel from behind the reliquary, wrapped too carefully to be a pilgrim's gift. It's weighty and rigid, the size of a deck of cards. She tucks it beneath the scapula as well, and for a second, she almost looks like any sister walking to the infirmary. Almost. A bell rings once from the cloister, soft, irregular, clearly not official. She straightens and moves toward the side door, the one that leads into the passage, skirting the gardens. When she passes you, she smells of beeswax, lavender, and old stone, the scent of a room that keeps secrets by habit. Her shoes make no sound. Your heart kindly provides enough for both of you. You follow at a distance through a corridor that curves like a river. The night outside has thickened, the moon sliding behind cloud. In the garden, the hedges are cut into chessboard squares. Someone thought they were clever, and the gravel paths glitter like ground sugar. She treads the grass edges, no crunch, no trail. You almost admire it, the way you admire a thief who leaves the house cleaner than they found it. At the far wall, a small door opens from the inside without a key. The trick is the pressure on the hinge. A half lift, then a pull. She knows it. Beyond, a covered passage links the chapel to the almonry, where charity is given and received with enough paperwork to count as prayer. She slips in, disappears among hanging cloaks meant for the poor. You wait, counting slowly to a jokingly pious 10. Because if you can't make yourself laugh in a dark hallway, when can you? Then ease the door wider. Inside the almonry, one lantern burns. The nun has shed the veil for a wool hood, the plain grey of a servant. A basket sits on the bench, filled with crusty loaves and a folded shawl. Under the bread, she nests the parcel, and you hear a muted clink, like coin or crystal. Quirky tidbit. Medieval almonries sometimes stitched coins into the hems of garments for discreet distribution, a kindness that jingled only when you danced. She ties the basket with a workman's knot, one tug to release it, and steps back into the covered way. A figure waits in the arch, broad shoulders in a mason's cloak, hands gloved against the chill. He bows, too polished for a stone cutter, and his voice, when it comes, is a courtier's low clarity. Sister. Brother, she says, not looking at him long enough to make it a question. She gestures at the basket. For the sick poor at the east gate. He accepts it, but his thumb depresses the weave at the rim, checking for a seal. There is none. The message is in the bread, in the clink, in the rosemary that ghosts the linen beneath. He nods. They'll eat well. She inclines her head, already turning away. You watch the exchange like a spectator at a conjurer's tent. Now you see a charitable errand, now you don't. When the man vanishes toward the gate, you follow the nun instead. She retraces her steps to the chapel, veils herself again, and returns the saint's arm to its solemn pose. Before leaving, she touches the altar cloth and presses her palm flat, as if taking an oath. Fact: monastic houses often held royal patronage. Queens might claim spiritual kinship with particular convents, sending gifts, seeking intercession, sometimes even shelter. A queen's path to safety could be paved with psalms and well-timed generosity. At the threshold, she pauses, head tilted. You hold your breath. Her hand slips under her scapula, checking perhaps that a different case still rests there. When she steps out, you catch the brief glint of a signet ring on a thong. Not her size, not her station. It's engraved with two entwined serpents, the crest you saw glowing in the corridor's candlelight. That exiled house again, creeping like ivy. She disappears down the cloister and you lean against cold stone, fitting the night's pieces together. The chessboard packed, the falcon's flight, the crimson lace threads, each a small gear in a quiet machine. This nun, real or borrowed, is the machine's courier, the kind of person history thanks by forgetting. You return to the garden, listening to the hedges hush like pages. Somewhere the east gate murmurs open, and a basket of bread becomes a treaty, or a bribe, or proof that someone can count higher than the king's temper. Historians still argue whether this kind of traffic is treason or survival. You decide the answer depends on whether you're hungry. A cat darts across the path and vanishes into the rosemary. You think of a scribbled marginal note from a bored monk you once read, annoyed at paw prints across fresh ink. Even the cloister can't keep out a creature with its own errands. Neither, it seems, can the crown. You smile quietly at the thought that a dynasty's fate might rustle like a veil in a side chapel and smell faintly of herbs. Joke 3, if you're counting. You came for bedtime history and got haute cuisine, smuggling with a side of theology. The lamp before the altar gutters, then steadies, as if the chapel itself has taken a breath and decided to keep the secret a little longer. You step back into the corridor, letting the door fall shut with a sigh that sounds almost like Amen. You follow the tremor of thread through the palace, that soft insect hum of looms working after hours, until you reach a long chamber whose walls were winter. Great tapestries smother the stone, drinking up draughts and gossip alike. The air is warm with wool and hot iron. Braziers glow like sleepy eyes. 5 looms stand in a row, their warp strings vertical as rain, and 3 women weave with the steady patience of people who know a knot can move armies. You slip along the edge, fingers grazing the thick nap of a hunting scene. Stags leap through stitched forests while hounds stretch into gold thread lightning. The hound's collars gleam, actual gilt wound around silk, you realize. The threads laid down with a whisper of glue and couched by hair-thin stitches. It's not just pretty. It's expensive enough to hire a mercenary band, and someone chose to spend it on collars. That's a choice, and choices speak. Mainstream fact for your sleepy brain. Royal and noble households used tapestries as insulation and propaganda, hauling them from castle to castle with the traveling court. Unlike frescoes, they pack up, follow the monarch, and unroll wherever authority needs a backdrop. Whole audiences happen beneath woven saints and lions, so that power can borrow their halos and manes. You stand in that theater now, watching the next scene get written in thread. One weaver, grey braid, needle stuck like a quill above her ear, glances your way and then past you toward the doorway. We'll add the serpents after the border, she murmurs, not to you. The word prickles your skin. Serpents again, those entwined twins from the crest that should be extinct. On the loom nearest her, the border repeats oak leaves and acorns, except every seventh acorn is just slightly longer, its cap tilted. You've learned to read that kind of tilt. Historians still argue whether borders like these carried deliberate ciphers or whether desperate modern minds, project patterns onto decor. And yet, there's that odd acorn rhythm and, near the corner, a tiny stitch of red that doesn't belong in a field of greens and browns. Your old friend Crimson, the sewing room's signature. You breathe slower, as if you can make your pulse less noticeable to thread. A junior weaver lifts a shuttle loaded with shimmering weft, flat strips of gilded membrane wrapped around silk, the kind that squeaks faintly when bent. Quirky tidbit, some workshops used fish glue to secure delicate metal threads. The smell was distinctive. You lean in, and sure enough, there's a ghost of brine under the wool and heat. If this tapestry could talk, it would say ocean adjacent. You make a note to thank your falcon if you ever see her again. Coastal messages are on brand tonight. The loom's pattern is guided by a painted cartoon pinned behind the warp. But a corner of that cartoon is different, chalky, smudged, and recently altered. The original design showed a neutral banner fluttering over a city gate. Now, an overdrawn serpent winds around the staff, its head turned toward a crescent moon. The moon is stitched not in white, but in a pale, almost sickly yellow that anyone would mistake for light. Unless they'd been in the queen's dressing room and recognized the hue of a certain pearl-laced powder. Someone is threading a private joke or a warning into a wall-sized picture. You watch the rhythm, beat, shuttle, draw. The senior weaver hums under her breath, a rhythm older than the crown, and with every pass, the serpents creep closer to visibility. For the winter hall, she tells the apprentice, hang it so the west light catches the gold. Which winter hall? The one where ambassadors sit with tea so hot it peels the tongue, or the one where the king plays at mercy? Placement is a message. Light is punctuation. You drift to a tapestry already finished and rolled halfway, ready for transit. Its reverse shows a mess of thread tails, like a forest of roots, and tucked into that forest is a knot, deliberate and neat, tied with 3 turns. You pinch it. It isn't structural, it's a seal. On impulse, you slide a fingernail under it. Your nail finds a sliver of parchment, thin as onion skin, folded into a tuck on the backing. You don't pull it out because you've learned finally. But you feel the tiny ridges of pressed wax through the cloth. 2 serpents, intertwined. Of course. A court official enters, the sort who sweats in winter because protocol is heavy. He carries a ledger and a piece of chalk, and he checks the cartoon with a purse-lipped frown. The crest in the corner, he says, must be the lion. The senior weaver does not look up. It is when the angle turns. He peers, confused by angles. And the acorns? Autumn, she says, good for grain. He nods, relieved to recognize a safe word, scribbles something, and trundles off. You watch his back and think how many histories were delivered past men like that, who glanced and didn't see. Cheers to them, truly. Half the secrets in the world owe their lives to a well-timed shrug. The apprentice steals a look at you then, curious and a little amused. She lowers her voice. You want to help? Hold the beater. You place your hands on the smooth bar, feel the loom's small tremors. She slides the shuttle across. You bring the beater forward, tamping the row into place. It's like lining up soldiers who happen to be shiny. Careful, she says, or the gold will break. You ease back, power but polite. A good lesson, and not only for weaving. She grins. First-timers always hit too hard. Story of my life, you whisper, thinking of that time you nearly knocked over a reliquary by breathing. Joke 1, faint but real. On a work table, spools sit like little suns. One spool holds a silk the color of dusk. Another holds a thread dyed with weld and madder, a yellow with a hint of warmth, like candlelight on honey. The dyes, you remember, are stories too. Weld for treaties, madder for blood, wode for, bruised egos. Do you make that joke out loud? Maybe not. The tapestries are laughing quietly already. Mainline history taps your shoulder. The famed Bayou tapestry is technically embroidery, not woven tapestry, but it proves the point. Textiles can tell state-level stories with all the subtlety of a drum. Here, the story is subtler. A garden hunt that will hang right behind negotiators, reminding them, gently, that serpents know how to coil, that oaks endure, that hounds don't always obey the whistle they were trained to heed. The senior weaver ties off a length and stands, stretching the ache out of her shoulders. "Fetch the charter," she tells the apprentice. The girl vanishes behind a curtain and returns with, not parchment, but a strip of stiffened silk covered in fine lettering, the kind of draft that wouldn't scandalize anyone if discovered because it reads like a donation inventory. 20 ells of cloth, 4 bolts, of fustian, a basin. But see there, the acorn count matches the adjusted border. 20 is not 20. It is 5 and 3 and 12, and the space is between them. Who asked for the serpents? You ask, because the room feels like it might indulge one question. No one ever asks, the weaver says. They suggest a shade of green. You can't help it, joke 2 trips out. Subtle. Next, they'll request a very specific number of leaves purely for aesthetic reasons. She gives you a dry look that says you're not wrong. From the far end, a door clicks. A figure enters in a plain merchant's cloak, gait regal, hands pale in their gloves, the market woman who wasn't. From your earlier daylight misdirection, she doesn't remove the hood. "For the winter hall?" she asks. If the west light agrees, the weaver answers. The cloak tilts, agreement received. A small purse exchanges hands, heavy enough to do someone an injury. The cloaked woman lingers by the nearly finished border, tracing the odd acorn with a fingertip. "Too long," she murmurs. "Or exactly right." "Exactly right," the weaver says. "Then we're agreed," the woman replies, and leaves the room with the kind of silence that money buys. When the door shuts, the apprentice exhales. "I like the serpents," she admits. "They look like they're listening." You think of the nun's signet, the falcon's rosemary, the chess piece rattling in a sleeve. "They are," you say. "So are we." Joke 3 sneaks in as you eye the loom. If a tapestry starts whispering back, "I'm returning this beater and going to bed," the apprentice snorts softly, scandalized and entertained, and you feel the chamber relax by a thread's width. You step away, leaving the weavers to their gold and glue, their angles and acorns. As you go, the looms resume their soft thunder, a rain that falls upward, each pass tightening an invisible treaty. You will someday watch hang in the west light while guests admire the dogs. Later, diplomats will compliment the oaks and not notice that the serpents have turned their heads toward the moon, listening for the rustle of a nun's veil or the rush of a falcon's wings. The room smells of wool and fish glue and choices. You carry that scent with you into the corridor, where the winter draft dries and fails to bite through the woven weather on the walls. Behind you, a final tap, the weaver's beater kissing the weft into place. Gentle, precise, exactly right. The music reaches you first, lute strings plucked with the lazy precision, drifting down a stairwell that smells faintly of roasted meat and clove-spiced wine. You follow the sound into a high-ceilinged hall lit by iron chandeliers, their candles trembling in the breath of 100 conversations. The feast is in full swing, all gleam and gold, and every table heavy with trenchers, peacocks in feathered display, and pies whose crusts rise like miniature fortresses. At the far end, the queen sits in her high-backed chair, flanked by lords whose rings flash whenever they lift their cups. A servant refills the goblets in a steady circuit, his eyes politely lowered, but his ears turned toward every conversation. Here, words are sharper than the knives. You weave between the tables, pretending to study the roasted swans, listening for the currents beneath the chatter. There, at the third table from the dais, 2 men toast the king's health in a tone that could pickle fish. They clink goblets, eyes never meeting, and sip without tasting. Historians still argue whether banquets were truly occasions for diplomacy or simply public theatre for decisions already made in quieter rooms. The truth is probably both. Feasts are perfect for smiling at your enemy while slipping the knife in somewhere invisible. A noblewoman to your left lifts her cup toward a rival down the table. "To your son's safe return," she says sweetly. The rival's jaw tightens. His son is still missing at sea. The toast isn't well-wishing, it's a reminder of absence. Quirky fact: medieval banquets often included subtleties, elaborate sugar sculptures shaped like castles or animals that sometimes carried political messages. Tonight's centerpiece is a marzipan crown, with a bite already taken out of it, as if someone couldn't wait for dessert. Whether that's symbolic or just greedy, you can't quite tell. The servant passes again, refilling the queen's cup last. You notice her hand brushing the stem in a small, deliberate circle before she drinks. A signal? Her gaze drifts to the far side of the hall, where a man in plain clothes stands by the musicians, not playing, just watching. When she sips, he nods once and melts into the crowd. You move closer to the dais, catching fragments of talk, a complaint about grain levies, a whisper about the West Hall tapestry, a laugh too loud to be real. The queen sets her goblet down with a click. A lord across from her lifts his in reply, the liquid inside catching the light in a sudden suspicious flash, slightly darker than the wine everyone else drinks. The musicians change tune, faster now, covering the scrape of benches as people lean in. You spot the falconer near the kitchen doors, his eyes on the queen, his hand resting on something in his belt pouch. He doesn't move, just waits. Somewhere near the hearth, two servants exchange platters in a deliberate misstep, spilling gravy onto a nobleman's lap. The distraction lasts just long enough for another goblet to change hands, wine traded for something clearer. It strikes you that this hall is less a place for eating than for maneuvering. Each toast, each refill is another chess move. The marzipan crown sits lower now, its missing bite starting to look like a crescent moon. When the final course arrives, a roasted boar with an apple in its mouth, the queen rises. Her smile is gentle, her voice carrying over the hum to the prosperity of the realm and to the peace of its people. Every goblet lifts. The toast rings clear, but the eyes above them are measuring, weighing, choosing whether to swallow or simply touch cup to lip. You take a sip from your own borrowed cup. The wine tastes fine, sweet, with a faint note of rosemary that makes you glance toward the falconer again. He's already gone. The feast's heat fades behind you, replaced by the damp breath of night gardens. You follow the scent of wet earth and roses, the muffled thud of slippered feet on grass. The moon, still snagged in a drifting veil of cloud, spills silver where it can, turning hedges into shadowed walls and statues into watchful sentries. There, at the far edge of a gravel path, you catch sight of her, the queen, cloak drawn tight, her hair hidden under a simple hood. Even dressed like a lady's maid, she moves with that unmistakable economy of someone born to be watched. She glances once over her shoulder before vanishing behind a trellis overgrown with climbing roses. You follow, careful to keep to the grass so the gravel doesn't give you away. The air is heavy with the sweetness of blooms, but underneath lies the sharper scent of rosemary again, your traveling code, your winged courier's perfume. Historians still argue whether certain royal moonlit walks were innocent bids for privacy or deliberate escapes to secret meetings. A few even claim queens cultivated their own garden mazes to control who could find them. You duck through an arch of yew, the whirl narrowing to green walls and whispering leaves. Quirky tidbit: in some courts, gardeners were trusted confidants, holding keys to gates no chamberlain could open. They knew which flower beds hid locked trapdoors, which fountains masked entrances to old aqueducts. Here, a stone bench sits beside a rose bed, and behind it, the hedge parts just enough to reveal a narrow, doorless arch into deeper shadows. The queen slips through and you follow into a tunnel of foliage. The ground dips, the air cools, and suddenly you're in a secluded clearing, lit only by a pale spill of moonlight. A man waits there, his cloak dusted with travel, his boots wet from grass. He holds a small carved box, no bigger than a loaf of bread, its latch sealed with crimson thread. They speak low, words carried to you in pieces. Safe until Westlight in Winter Hall, the serpents will know. She takes the box, slipping it under her cloak as though it were nothing more than a posy of flowers. A breeze stirs the roses, scattering petals that stick to the damp hem of her gown. She shakes them free, but one catches in the latch of the box a tiny crimson flag against the pale wood. You think of the looped knot in the sewing room, the gold thread in the tapestry border, the falcon's leg band. Threads weave themselves into every part of this night. A sudden rustle from the far hedge. Someone else is watching. The queen's head turns sharply. The man tenses, his hand at his belt. But no one steps forward and the sound fades into the ordinary murmur of night. Still, the meeting ends there. She nods once, turns back toward the trellis, and he slips away toward the orchard wall. You shadow her as she retraces her steps. At the trellis, she pauses, plucks a rose, and tucks it into the gap in the lattice. The petals are pale, almost white in the moonlight, but at their heart they blush red, another marker for someone who knows where to look. She disappears into the palace through a side door, the scent of roses trailing after her. You linger, listening to the garden breathe, wondering how many messages are blooming here that no historian will ever pluck. You climb a corkscrew stair that feels like it's trying to twist your ankles into prophecy, following the thin smell of lamp oil and scraped vellum. At the top, a narrow door stands with a careless star chalked on it. 5 points, 2 smudged where a thumb hesitated. Inside, the room is a sky collapsed onto a desk. Charts, chords, brass rings, and a proper tyrant of an astrolabe glowering from a nail. Candles in pewter cups turn the parchment constellations into lakes that ripple when you breathe. The court astrologer is already there, hair like a weather map, fingers stained the brown of old walnuts. He doesn't startle when you enter. Either he expected you, or sleep is for other people. He draws a circle on a fresh sheet, then another inside it, then a cross through both. If you're here for romance, he murmurs, take the stairs back down. If you're here for survival, sit. You sit, because romance seems in low supply and the stairs are rude. He flicks open a box of weights and lays them on the corners of a chart so it won't curl. At the margin, someone, him, the queen, has doodled 2 entwined serpents. You recognize the exiled crest again, slithering across your night like a refrain. In the center of the chart, a small volvel spins, 2 paper wheels pinned with a thread and bead, sun chasing moon in polite circles. He nudges the bead with a fingernail. An hour makes thieves of kings, he says, or the other way around. Mainstream fact to anchor the stars. Medieval courts hired astrologers to cast horoscopes for births, journeys, and treaties. Coronations were timed to friendly planets, the way feasts were timed to harvests. You glance at a stack of ephemerides, the tables of where the wandering lights expect to be, and imagine the queen's decisions breathing in their margins. Another chart lies half under the astrolabe, its edges scorched as if a candle got curious. In one corner, a crescent moon drawn, not in white, but that pale yellow you've started to distrust, the powder's color that glowed on the tapestry cartoon. The stars are talking to the sewing room now. Of course they are. He marks 7 sharp points along a circle and inks little symbols you half remember from a monk's doodled zodiac. If Mars rises before the dawn, he says, don't cross water. If Jupiter smiles, send the basket. The basket, your almondry errand, nods from memory. He doesn't look at you, but his mouth quirks. The garden smelled of rosemary tonight. You think of the falcon's leg band, the queen's rose pinned in a trellis, the chess piece rattling like a conscience. You chart the sky, you say softly, and they chart the rooms. Rooms obey the sky more than they admit, he replies. So do tempers. He dots the page where Saturn sulks and draws a narrow lane between two houses like a smuggler's alley. This, he says, is the hour when the west light in the winter hall will favor serpents over lions. He lifts the page to the candle. The ink browns but doesn't vanish. Not lemon, he adds, oak gall, honest poison. He slides another sheet forward. A vellum man with a constellation tattooed inside, stars pricked at elbow and knee, tiny fish swimming in his belly. Quirky tidbit. The zodiac man shows where to bleed and where to cauterize based on the moon's mood. And while a barber surgeon might not consult the heavens before trimming your beard, he might glance before reaching for his bowl and leeches. The astrologer taps the man's throat. Don't drink toasts under a Gemini moon if you've enemies with steady hands. You think of goblets raised and lowered, the boar with its stupid apple smile, and fight the urge to check your own pulse. He reaches for the astrolabe, its reed, a lacework of bronze stars, turning with a soft, smug whisper. The instrument is a city map of the sky, and he swivels the rule, aligns a sight, squints at the window slit, where the moon stares back like someone eavesdropping with a lantern. If we delay, he murmurs. The king asks the wrong question at dawn. He glances toward a lidded basket in the corner. You've seen that make and weave before, almond reissue. If we hurry, he adds, the serpents lose their heads. His hand pauses above the chart, then resumes. Or keep them. Historians still argue whether astrologers actually steered policy or simply found clever explanations for winds that were already blowing. He smiles then, a creaky sunrise. If future historians can hear me, yes. You lean over the desk, reading the small notes penciled in the margins. Some are practical, road conditions, tides, the temper of a certain captain who was happier before taxes. Others are weirdly domestic. 2 hens gone broody, good omen for patience, and do not trust candles that sputter during Virgo. Joke 1 slips out before you can stop it. So the fate of the realm hinges on poultry and fussy wax? Everything hinges on poultry and fussy wax, he says gravely, which is somehow funnier. He opens a narrow drawer and takes out a sliver of crystal suspended on a thread. He holds it over the chart, it steadies, then lists toward the serpents sketched in the margin. Bias, he says, tisking at himself. I like their crest. The moon does too. With a pin, he dots 3 points along the line of the ecliptic, then draws a minuscule ship between them, sails puffed by ink. If a message rides the coast road tonight, he adds, the clouds will cover it by morning. Better wings than wheels. Your falcon stretches her shadow across the paper. On a side table rests a shallow bronze bowl half filled with water, the surface black as an unopened eye. He sets the bowl by the window and angles a mirror to catch the moon. The reflection lays a trembling coin on the water. Safer than staring, he mutters. You want to keep your vision past 40. You lean in. The coin wobbles, grows, thins, then sits sharp. There, he says, the hour. He cuts a notch into a beeswax candle. Not to mark time, but to remember courage when the wax drops level. You file away the detail. If tonight's timeline fails, at least you can light something and pretend you meant it. Joke 2, softly. I'll add, buy more candles to the royal strategy. He rolls up the chart with the careful impatience of someone used to outrunning dawn, ties it with crimson thread, the queen's color of choice when the message is for hands that won't fumble. From a coffer, he draws a signet you recognize, twin serpents. He doesn't seal the ribbon. He just weighs it in his palm as if testing whether the future is heavy enough. Return this to the queen when the west hall is lit, he says. If the light is wrong, don't hang the tapestry. Burn onions in the hearth and say there's smoke. Onions, you ask, suspicious of empires that pivot on soup. They make people cry, he says. Blurs the view. Buys an hour. Joke 3 lands with the soft thud of a kitchen knife. Strategic weeping, now part of your skill set. He tucks a smaller paper under the chart, one you only glimpse. A sketched garden path, a trellis, a rose marked with a tiny red dot. Your queen is brave, he says without looking up. Bravery is loud. We need quiet. He blows out one candle and the shadows rush in like gossip. Go while the moon is friendly. You hesitate at the door. And if the king asks, say the stars approve his question, he replies, and offer him better questions. He lifts the astrolabe, and for a heartbeat, the brass throws a constellation onto the ceiling that looks exactly like a falcon in stoop. Remember your rosemary, he says, and don't step on the cat. She has seniority. The stair tries to unwind you again, but you hold your shape, clutching the rolled future that smells faintly of oak gall and beeswax. Below, the palace stirs, someone laughing too brightly in a corridor, a guard stamping life back into numb feet. Loom's last shy thump before sleep. You move through it all like a needle through cloth, pulling a thin thread of starlight behind you. Not enough to be seen, just enough to keep your path from knotting. When you reach the landing that looks toward the winter hall, a draft slides along the wall, cool as thought. The west window is already grey with morning's rumour, but not yet bright. The hour is not lost. You press the chart to your chest, listen for the falcon's distant rush in the hush of stone, and step forward, one careful foot in front of the other, as if the floor were a line drawn across a page. And you are the sentence that will make it make sense. Morning sidles into the corridors on soft paws, and the palace coughs itself awake. Guards trading yawns, scullions arguing with kettles, a loom giving one last apologetic clack, like a door not quite shut. You keep your hood low and your pace steady, following the astrologer's instruction to be quiet enough to make bravery unnecessary. The west window is graying, but the hall hasn't bloomed with light yet. You slip past it, saving your judgment on tapestry angles for later. For now, you need daylight that isn't ceremonial, the sort that bounces off fish scales and copper pots and people who have places to be. The market quarter answers, lively as a pond after a tossed crust. Stalls sprout like mushrooms, linen rolled into fat bolts, onions stacked like small suns. You smirk, strategic weeping stockpile, and barrows of herbs that breathe rosemary, so insistently you almost look up to check for falcons. Hawkers chant prices in sing-song, which is basically an ancient podcast with worse ad breaks. You let the crowd carry you and the crowd teaches you. Elbow here, step there, watch for eels. You spot her almost immediately because she is trying so hard not to be spotted. The merchant woman at the cloth stall moves with the kind of balance most people need a tutor to learn. Her hood is plain, her cloak the brown of "don't look at me," but the drape falls as if it's been told stories by better fabrics. The gloves, too clean, too pale. And when she reaches to finger the selvage, her wrist turns with a little flourish that says, I have had people bow to this motion. You've learned the geometry of rank. It lives in footsteps and the way someone occupies a square of pavement. Historians still argue whether queens or highborn ladies truly went among the people in disguise, or whether later storytellers embroidered a few boring shopping trips into adventures. But your night has been all embroidery, and this thread gleams. She asks the clothier about yardage like a person who has memorized prices but never paid them. The clothier, who has definitely been paid by the same purse in other rooms, pretends not to notice her ringless hands and inclines his head in a way that says, I notice everything. Mainstream fact to steady your strolling. Medieval towns watched clothing like hawks. Sumptuary laws told you which fabric, cut, and color you could wear by rank. Velvet, certain furs, narrow shoes, or ridiculously pointy ones. Your social class was basically a walking receipt. Hence the plain hood, the neutral brown, and the gloves to hide a life without callous. She moves on with a bolt of modest linen tucked under her arm, which is exactly the kind of prop someone would pick when she wants the world to see her as a housekeeper on an errand. Her gait stays regal, even when she quickens. You follow, a flake in her wake, past a tinker's bell and a fishmonger's chorus. Joke 1 bubbles up. You are absolutely not tailing anyone, you are simply doing cardio with scenic aromas. At a cross street, she pauses to admire a display of dyed yarn, hanks of woad blue and welled yellow humming like a small choir. The dyer bows, eyes skittering to her gloves and back. Mistress, he says, a yard for your... He stops. Because what do you sell someone who can have anything and is pretending not to? She rescues him with a question about fastness in rain, a thing no queen's hands usually worry about, because other hands do. Quirky tidbit, while you pretend to study yarn, market credit often travelled as split tally sticks, wood notched for the sum, broken lengthwise so buyer and seller kept matching halves. When the debt was paid, the pieces kissed again. Romance, but with math. You watch a baker and a brewer settle such a stick, splinters and all, as if to remind you that treaties and loaves both depend on good accounting. Your not merchant woman drifts into a side lane where stalls thin and doorways start doing more of the talking. Above one door hangs a signboard with a painted glove, a glover's workshop. She slips inside, and you wedge yourself in the alcove of a shuttered apothecary, counting breaths. When she emerges, her left glove fits better than before, like a sheath with a secret tucked just so. You recall the dressing room's tiny ampules, the way a thumb could meet danger by accident or invitation. She heads toward a well at the square's edge, where a knot of women exchange news with buckets. The sound is water and names and weather. A child presents a muddy treasure, not treasure, and everyone performs the proper amazement. The disguised one bends easily, gracefully, and praises the find with a warmth that belongs to someone used to being watched for cruelty. Queens practice kindness like fencing. It must look effortless when it counts. A cart groans past, and a mason in a cloak lifts 2 fingers in a gesture so small you'd miss it if you hadn't lived a night of small gestures. You've seen shoulders like his under better cloth. He doesn't stop. She doesn't turn. But the moment lands between them like a folded note. The serpents have day costumes, it seems. You angle closer as she steps into the shadow of a church porch. Pigeons bicker across the roof. A cat considers republic versus monarchy and chooses monarchy because pigeons are tyrants. Joke 2. Sorry, pigeons. The woman sets the linen bolt on the step and smooths the edge, fingers fussing the selvage as if counting thread or timing. A bell half rings inside, not the hour, just a practice swing. On the third sway she stands, brushes a rose petal from her shoulder, who keeps roses on them in the market, and turns as a merchant's clerk arrives with a ledger. The ledger is a prop as loud as a trumpet to you now. They converse in prices, delivery windows, and the tragedy of damp warehouses. He writes nothing. When a boy trips, performing a perfect accident between them, the clerk steadies the woman's elbow, and in that touch, something passes. A folded paper, the size of a dried leaf, slides under her glove cuff. 2 breaths later, her gloved fingers settle on the ledger's blank page, leaving the faintest crescent of powder. Yes, that powder. Pale yellow pretending to be light, like a watermark no one asked to see. She's leaving her moon for anyone counting phases. She pays at a draper's stall with a coin that glints oddly dull. Lead cord, silvered surface, spendable. Traceable to the mint that pretends not to be loyal to serpents. Or maybe that's your paranoia snugging a belt. Historians still argue whether coin marks and clipped edges telegraphed allegiance or merely poverty. The debate, like money, circulates. The sun sneaks higher, catches on the awning ropes, threads light through everything. People are suddenly busier, which is to say, they are less observant, which is how daylight disguises thrive. Your almost queen becomes a little less outlined, as if the morning is willing to blend her into the cinnamon steam from the baker's. You let her slip away for 100 heartbeats and then find her again by the sound of a rose vendor praising thorns. She declines a bloom with plausible thrift and accepts the string tying the bouquet's stems. The string goes into her pocket, which is not made for strings but for threads with memories. Mainstream fact again, a friendly anchor. Many great ladies held patronage over city guilds. They visited workshops on procession days and saints' feasts, names carried from bench to court and back again. This looks nothing like procession, but the muscle memory of patronage is visible in how the street flexes to let her pass. She ends her errand at the north gate, where carts hemming and hawing about tolls let her stand for a moment in a pocket of quiet. There, in the lee of a stone buttress, she removes her right glove, briefly, so briefly, and you see the shadow of a signet mark impressed on skin, a twin serpent oval faint as a healed bruise. She tucks the glove back on with that little flourish, and the bruise becomes Ruma. Joke 3 is small and survives on low oxygen. You make a note to practice walking like a person who has never stubbed a toe. Your toes, insulted by cobbles, lodge a formal complaint. A crier blares the hour. The market leaps to keep time. She nods once toward the church porch. The ledger clerk is gone. The cat has declared the roof its personal realm and turns her steps palaceward. You follow, because the day has stopped insisting she is ordinary, and the Westlight will soon have opinions about serpents and lions. On the way back, you pass the Glovers again. In his window sits a pair of pale kidskin gloves with tiny star prick holes around the wrist. Just ventilation to anyone else. To you, they're a constellation, points you could connect with the length of crimson thread to make a falcon in stoop. You smile. The city is speaking fluent tapestry now, only nobody minds, because it's daylight, and stories are supposed to behave in daylight. At the palace gate, the guards lean into their halberds and gossip about a spilled cart of apples. One apple rolls to your foot, red with a pale crescent where it rubbed the cobble. You pick it up, hold the moon in your palm, and set it on the step. Then you go inside after the woman who is not a merchant, the linen bolt tucked like an alibi under her arm, and the scent of rosemary just this side of imaginary. The tower doesn't loom so much as sulk, round and heavy against the pale morning, a drum with its skin pulled tight. You circle its base along a strip of frost-brittle grass, breath-making little ghosts, ears tuned for anything that isn't wind. There, faint as a thread stretched too far, the shape of a melody slips out of a high slit window and unfurls over the yard. A lullaby. Not for a child, for someone who needs to be smaller than fear for a little while. You stand beneath the stone like a person who just happens to be admiring masonry. The tune comes again, clearer now, riding vowels that hitch and dip as if the singer is measuring steps you can't see. Your skin lifts. The melody traces a pattern you recognize from the night's weaving. 7 notes, pause, 3, 2, then a turn that feels like an acorn tilting in a border. You glance up and can't see a face, only the dark of the window, a slice in the tower's hide. Best not linger, a guard mutters as he passes, then lingers himself, because gossip is stronger than orders. The midnight singer again, he adds, not quite to you, sends the cats mad, sends me mad. He moves on, whistling a different tune as if to scrub his ears. Historians still argue whether prisoners truly sent messages in song or whether the romance of minstrels and coded ballads outgrew the truth. But the human voice is a stubborn courier. Even in stone rooms, even with straw and iron for furniture, it finds a way out through a slit no wider than a palm. And in a court, where threads carry words and birds carry treaties, it would be surprising if a melody didn't carry at least a hint of arithmetic. You edge toward the postern door where deliveries come and hope leaves. A scullion pushes past with a bucket, water slopping, muttering about how stairs should be illegal. You slip in behind him. The tower's breath swallowing you. Damp limestone, old smoke, a suggestion of rosemary that makes you pause. Your traveling code again. Faint but there, as if the air has good memory. The stair curls meanly. You climb, counting in the pattern the song taught you. 7, pause, 3, 2, and find yourself at a landing, with a narrow door, barred by a patience-tested guard. He yawns, then notices your bucket, borrowed, and shrugs. Careful, he says, she sings better than she eats. She? You echo, as if you haven't been building a map to this pronoun all night. He rolls a shoulder, claims she used to rock a cradle in the queen's house, claims all sorts when the moon's nosy. He lifts the bar, you squeeze by, and the door sighs the tired sigh of wood that has heard everything twice. Inside, the cell is rectangle and restraint. Rushes on the floor, a pallet, a rough stool by the window slit. A woman sits there, wrapped in a shawl that was once confident blue, and is now the memory of sky. Her hair is braided tight as a promise, and her hands, broad, capable, rest on her knees as if waiting for a bowl. She doesn't turn when you enter. She's watching the slice of world the slit allows. A triangle of courtyard, a wedge of sky, the corner of the winter hall's west window. She keeps singing, soft, as if the note itself is the wool she pulls around her shoulders. The words float in pieces. West light, oak leaves, serpents sleep, hounds don't bite. You stand very still and let your pulse catch the rhythm. When she finally turns, there's nothing dramatic in it, just a measuring, a weighing of your face against the night. You walk like someone counting, she says. You sing like someone writing, you answer, because sleep-deprived sarcasm is your second language. Joke 1. If this is ASMR, it's the kind that files lockpicks. She smiles a little. It's an old cradle song for the child who never wanted sleep but always wanted to know where the moon went. She pats the stool. You sit, bucket between your feet like a confession. Once, she says, I sang it in a different house. Mainstream fact to ground the hush. High-status prisoners in medieval castles were often allowed servants, books, even music. Not all cells were holes. Some captives wrote verses that still survive, lines scratched on plaster or copied by sympathetic scribes. The woman's voice isn't court-trained, but it's steady, and the melody is simple in the way secret things prefer. Easy to remember, hard to forget. What did you do? You ask. What I was told, she says, then tilts her head. And what I was not. She touches her throat, where the shawl's edge is embroidered with tiny marks that could be ornament or letters pretending. They say I carried bread. They say I carried a child. They say I carried a tune up the wrong stairs. Her smile is thin. They say so many things about women who carry. From the slit, the courtyard glints. The west window of the winter hall sits dull, waiting for light to choose a side. The woman hums and then speaks between notes, as if both are necessary for sense. If you ever have to give a message to a wall, give it a song. Walls are nosy. Sound likes to stick. She nods toward the ceiling. Chimneys too. That's a trick of old stone. It listens. Quirky tidbit. Garderobes. Those vertical shafts that served as medieval toilets, sometimes doubled as message chutes. Objects, wrapped and weighted, could be sent to a moat, to a waiting net, to a gardener with strong hands and no sense of smell. You keep that to yourself in case the bucket gives you away. I looked after the queen, she says, when her nights were longer than her patience. Her eyes crease at the corners like someone who has soothed colic and counseled despair. I know the sound she makes when she hides worry behind that pleasant mouth. The phrase lands with the intimacy of mirror. I know what lullabies she hates and which she forgives. Is this one forgiven? You ask. It's the only one that never promised the moon would stay, she says. It only teaches how to count until it returns. She taps the sill. 7, pause, 3, 2, counting trains breath. Breath trains fear. You listen. The melody winds and unwinds, threading through words that are domestic on the surface. Rock, hush, sleep, while the intervals tug you toward meaning. Westlight, serpents, hounds. It's the textile room in musical form. You realize the lullaby can be read in two directions. Forward, it soothes. Backward, it instructs. If you start on the 7th, the hounds don't bite becomes the hounds bite only when the moon is wrong. That would look great on a sampler. Joke 2. New motivational poster. Hang in there, says the cat. Check Mars, says the astrologer. Does the queen know you're here? You venture. She knows where I am, the way a mother knows where she left a thimble, the woman says. Not every minute, but enough. She shifts, and you catch the glint of a thread sewn into the shawl's hem. Crimson. 3 tiny knots. You could pretend not to see it. You don't. If you have to tell her something, she adds, sing it beside the west wall when the tapestries wake. She'll hear. She always did. And if the king hears, then you chose the wrong key. A dry blink. Historians still argue whether kings love songs because they recognize themselves in them or because songs lie more kindly than people do. Her hand moves to the straw at her feet and finds a small lump, a crust wrapped in cloth. She breaks it, offers you half, and in the gesture you see the entire almonry again. The nun's basket, the careful clink. The bread smells faintly of onions. You try not to laugh because you will choke. Onions, still part of the strategic plan. She watches your face and, because she is not cruel, doesn't ask. The guard thumps the door with the flat of his hand. Time. His tone says he will give you 2 more minutes because music widens time like warm dough. You stand, bucket forgotten. The woman turns back to her window, eyes on the slack light. When the west wall brightens, she says, don't trust the first applause. It's always for the costumes. You think of the market woman's gloves, the courtier's mason shoulders, the cat's monarchy. Costumes are working overtime this week. Do you want anything? You ask, stupidly, because the list in your head, keys, justice, sky, doesn't fit in a pocket. A song back, she says, one with a joke. You clear your throat and because desperation is the mother of comedy, you sing 2 crooked lines about a falcon who filed a complaint with the fish glue because the tapestry smelled ocean adjacent. It is not good. It is, however, sincere. She laughs. A little bell that doesn't set off alarms, and for a moment, the tower feels less like a drum and more like a bowl catching light. Joke 3 lands, tired but triumphant. As you leave, she resumes the lullaby, soft now, and you carry it down the stair like a cup you don't dare spill. Outside, the yard has warmed by a whisper, and the winter hall's west window begins to gather the day like a cloak. The song threads through you. 7, 3, 2. You imagine it sliding along stone, seeding itself in cracks, waiting in the mortar for footsteps to sync with its count. When you pass the guard, he nods at your empty hands. Forgot the bucket, he says. Left it with the wall, you answer, which is true in the way the night has taught you truth works, sideways but accurate. Across the courtyard, a cat steps daintily along a parapet, tail like punctuation, and the first spark of sun touches the winter hall. You think of serpents listening, of acorns leaning, of onions weeping on cue. The lullaby hums in your bones, a small machine that keeps fear in reasonable shoes. The queen, somewhere behind stone and tapestry, knows the tune. You hope the right people are in the right key. The night has pulled its velvet back over the palace by the time the first masked dancers spill into the long gallery. Light from 100 candles trembles across polished parquet, painting the floor in gold that shivers under every step. The air is thick with the perfume of heated beeswax, wine, and too many different flowers crammed into vases like gossip stuffed in a small room. You lean against a column, one more shadow among dozens. Masks range from delicate silk dominoes to carved visages of animals, foxes, stags, a particularly arrogant peacock. A trio of musicians in the gallery's corner pluck a fast rhythm, a little too quick for comfort, as though daring someone to trip. The queen enters without fanfare, hidden in plain sight among the masks. Hers is a half face, gilded and feathered, revealing only the curve of her mouth and the deliberate lift of her chin. She moves easily, gliding between clusters of murmured conversation. People bow without knowing to whom they bow. Or perhaps they know exactly. Historians still argue whether masquerades were genuinely places for freedom, where class could be blurred, masks leveling the field, or whether everyone still recognized each other's stance, voice, and perfume. Tonight, you suspect it's both. Disguise offers plausible deniability, not actual ignorance. You spot her near the far wall, speaking to a masked figure in a deep green doublet, embroidered with serpents so tiny they could pass for vines. He offers a hand. They step into the dance. Their movements are slow enough to be conversation in motion, his fingers pressing patterns into her palm, hers tracing responses along his knuckles. A silent exchange, fluent and dangerous. Quirky tidbit. Some dance manuals of the late Middle Ages included secret steps that could signal everything from political allegiance to romantic intent. A turn too early, a heel placed at a certain angle, harmless in public, decisive in code. You watch for it now. When they reach the end of the line, she pivots the wrong way, forcing him to adjust. A misstep, unless you know it's not. A masked lady dressed as a falcon, grey feathers, dark eyes, cuts between them on the next pass. The queen's partner vanishes into the crowd, leaving her momentarily alone. She laughs softly at something no one said, sips from a goblet brought by a servant, and drifts toward a side alcove. You follow, weaving through dancers. In the alcove, a table holds a scattering of playing cards, their faces painted with the usual kings, queens, and knaves. Except the Queen of Hearts here wears a gown patterned with oak leaves, and the Knave of Clubs holds a falcon instead of a weapon. She picks up the oak leaf queen, tucks it into her sleeve. A man in a fox mask joins her, bows, and without speaking, slides the knave into his doublet. The exchange is so smooth it feels rehearsed. The music falters for a beat. One of the violin strings snaps, whipping against the air like an impatient tongue. Heads turn. In that breath of distraction, the fox and the queen separate, each swallowed by different doors. You choose her trail, slipping after her through a narrow passage that smells faintly of rosemary and the faint musk of old costumes. At the end, she emerges into another hall where the masks thin and the conversations are heavier. She doesn't remove hers, she doesn't need to, but she adjusts it just enough to catch your eye before vanishing behind a screen. From beyond, a voice rises, not hers, but urgent and male. Before the west light, the rest is muffled, cut off by the thump of the musicians resuming their tune. You circle, trying to find another way in, but when you reach the spot behind the screen, there's nothing. Just an open balcony, empty, except for a single crimson thread caught on the railing. You wind it around your finger, thinking of tapestries, chess pawns, and falcon bands. Somewhere in the gallery, the queen has rejoined the dance, her partner now a stag whose antlers cast strange shadows on the walls. Joke 1. You're starting to think everyone in this palace moonlights as a tailor. Joke 2. If masks are meant to hide, why are they better at pointing? Joke 3. You really need a mask just to watch these. People without spraining your face from all the eyebrow work. The night spins on. Music and movement wrapping around secrets like silk around a blade. And still, in every turn and step, the patterns you've been tracing continue. Thread, scent, sign, shadow. Each disguise a different verse in the same song. The air in this part of the palace is different. Close, stale, like parchment that's been folded and hidden for too long. You follow it down a corridor where the torchlight is too careful. Every sconce lit, but turned slightly inward as if the flames themselves are witnesses. A pair of guards stand by a thick oak door. their halberds crossed, until a steward murmurs a word and they open just enough to let you slip inside. The chamber beyond is windowless, panelled in dark wood that drinks light whole. A heavy table sits in the center, its surface bare except for a single ewer of water and a plate of bread that no one touches. Chairs ring the table, 10 in all, but only 6 are occupied. The queen is one of them, mask gone now, her face arranged in the calm geometry of someone who has rehearsed this look in mirrors. Across from her, the king leans back in his chair, fingers steepled, eyes narrowed. The others, a bishop, 2 lords, a lady of unmistakable influence, and a man you recognize only by his serpent-carved ring, watch like predators who aren't sure which animal they're hunting. The steward announces closed proceedings, and the guards shut the door. The sound of the latch falling is almost soft enough to miss. Historians still argue whether such trials, if they can be called that, were truly about justice or merely theatre to formalize decisions already made. With no record but rumor, it's impossible to prove. But sitting here now, you can feel how little the verdict will depend on facts and how much on who breathes in and out at the right moments. The bishop clears his throat. We are gathered to address recent disturbances to the crown's peace. He does not name them. No one does. The man with the serpent ring leans forward. The queen has been seen in the east garden after hours. Gardens, she replies, do not tell time. Her voice is soft enough to be polite, but the weight in it presses back. A lord in blue silk lifts a folded scrap of linen, the kind you've seen pass from sewing chamber to chapel to falconer's glove. This was found in the possession of a mason, unlettered, yet its seams are of a royal workshop's hand. It's a handkerchief, the queen says. Masons sneeze. The lady of influence's smile is almost kind, and the crest stitched into its corner. The queen doesn't look away. It belonged to my mother. We don't unpick memory in this house. Quirky tidbit, in some courts, the possession of an embroidered token could be as damning as a signed confession. Cloth was costly, and its patterns as unique as a seal. Here, every stitch is a question with the answer already penciled in. The king drums his fingers once. The matter, he says, is whether these gatherings imperil the stability of the realm. Or yours, the queen murmurs, barely audible. The serpent ring man's gaze flicks to the bishop, who nods, then to the steward, who steps forward with a small box. He opens it to reveal the chess piece, the pawn with the hidden parchment you saw days ago. The king takes it, turns it in his fingers, and sets it down in front of her. Explain. She looks at it for a long time. It's a pawn, she says at last. It moves forward. It becomes something else if it reaches the end. A thread of silence stretches across the table. Someone's breath catches. Someone else shifts a boot. From somewhere deep in the wood paneling comes a faint sound. 7 knocks. Pause. 3, 2. You know it instantly. The prisoner's lullaby, smuggled in through the stone. The queen's mouth tightens. Not fear, not quite a smile, more like the acknowledgement of a friend arriving late, but in time. The lady leans back, eyes sharp. You hear it too? She says to the king. He frowns, as if dismissing a fly. A draft. You watch the queen's hands, folded in her lap, the tip of her thumb brushing the inside of her ring finger. She's counting. The bishop tries again. These actions are survival. She cuts in, voice still low, but with an edge now. You think I can't feel the floor shift under this table? That I don't know which of you would replace me if you thought you could do it without lighting the hall on fire? The serpent ring man glances at the king, who remains still, but his eyes have gone to the bread on the table. You think of onions in hearts, of smoke as cover. Someone coughs deliberately, and the sound seems to loosen the air. Joke 1 drifts through your head like a dangerous bubble. If this is justice, I'd hate to see improv night. The steward closes the box, slides it back. We will reconvene when the west light falls on the winter hall, he says. Everyone stands. The guards move to the door, the latch lifting with a click. As they file out, the queen passes you without pause. but you catch the faintest trace of rosemary in her wake. A message, maybe, or just her way of reminding you the night isn't done counting. By late afternoon, the winter hall holds its breath. The west light you've been courting all night finally bends through leaded panes and walks itself up the wall. It finds the tapestry exactly where the weavers said it should hang, and, obedient to the astrologer's chart, it kisses the gilded threads until the oaks glow and the serpents turn their small stitched heads toward the room. 100 people pretend not to stare at a wall that is currently making decisions. The king arrives with a retinue that smells of cold iron and impatience. The queen enters alone, the hush following her like a well-trained dog. She wears neither crown nor mask, only a dark gown that refuses to attract attention, except it does, because the absence of ornament reads louder than rubies. You notice the faint crescent of powder at her glove's edge, that pale moon you've been following through rooms. She does not bother to brush it away. The steward unrolls a parchment you recognize by scent and thread. Oak, gall-ink, crimson tie. Words parade. Disturbances, stability, oaths, mercy. Mercy is the room's favorite costume. The bishop invokes peace as if it were a saint who might actually attend if called nicely. The serpent ring lord watches the light on the tapestry as if awaiting a cue from gold. Your Majesty, the steward concludes, the crown offers resolution. She answers with a tilt of the chin that you've only ever seen at the edge of cliffs. The crown, she says, and now the hush sharpens, is a hat that judges the head. She removes a ring, simple, heavy, and sets it on the table like a small planet. Then slowly, she unhooks a necklace thread from the inside hem of her sleeve. It keeps coming, long, deliberate, as if the jewelers hid a river of light in her seam. Quirky tidbit. Royal women sometimes sewed gems into clothing hems for safety or smuggling. Inventories list pearls in the cuff, as if cuffs were pockets. The room watches this hemmed river empty into her palm and realizes what it means before anyone says it. She's paying the bill for her own exit. The king keeps his hands steepled. A muscle ticks in his jaw, a tiny drummer behind skin. Exile, he says at last, tasting the word like bitter wine. To the coast. To the coast, she agrees, and somewhere a falcon in your memory spreads invisible wings. The convent at Saint-Marais, my household reduced, my name intact. Historians still argue whether such choices were choices, abdications wrapped in silk, or forced performances scored to save a realm's face. They debate if queens traded jewels to buy time for allies or simply to buy safe roads. Looking at her now, you doubt the categories hold. She's at once surrender and strategy, a woman turning herself into a message that will keep traveling long after the guards think the roads are empty. The serpent ring lord bows, a fraction too deep. Her grace's generosity honors the realm. He means the jewels. He also means the silence she is about to take with her. Bread, the bishop says, fumbling for sanctity, shall be provided for the journey. You manage, scandalously, not to laugh. Joke 1. Excellent. The onions have a budget line now. A clerk approaches with a chest lined in velvet, the kind that swallows sound. She lays her necklace in it, then a brooch you've never seen her wear. From her pocket she produces the glove string the rose seller gave her, ties the chest, and presses her signet, the twin serpents, into soft wax. The seal takes, like a thing relieved to be recognized. The steward reads conditions. Attendants step forward. The door remembers how to open. She does not move. Instead, she turns to the window where the west light has now reached the tapestry's border. You see it, the 7th acorn longer, the tiny stitch of red at the turn. If you didn't know, you wouldn't know, but you do. She does. So do the people who need to. She faces the king and speaks in a voice that threads the room to itself. You will keep the winter hall warm, she says, as if remarking on weather. You will water the rosemary in the upper garden. You will hear the cats at night and not curse them. Her eyes rest on the serpent ring lord. You will let the weavers finish what they began. The king's reply is ceremonial. He grants the safe conduct, the escort, the right to carry personal effects, some effects being more personal than others. He does not look at the tapestry. He does not look away from her. Servants move like chess pieces, learning how to breathe. The falconer is not summoned, but you feel the draft his absence makes. The nun is nowhere and everywhere, because that is her job description. The prisoner's lullaby finds a seam in the paneling and presses through, almost too soft to trust. 7. Pause. 3. 2. The queen does not turn her head, but the corner of her mouth remembers knowing the tune. When she finally walks, it is not to the dais or the door, but to the wall. She stops beneath the woven hounds and raises her hand, not touching gold, only warming the air near it. Hang this in spring, she tells the steward, when ambassadors feel clever. As you wish, your grace. She passes near you then, and the rosemary you've been smelling for 24 hours decides to say goodbye. Tell the woman in the tower, she says, without moving her lips, that the moon is punctual. You bow to air because you have finally learned how to be furniture convincingly. Joke 2. New resume skill, discreet cabinetry. At the threshold, she pauses one last time and reaches to the table where a bowl of apples performs innocence. She chooses the one with a pale crescent rubbed into its skin and tucks it into her cloak. A pocket moon to travel with. Joke 3. Contraband, but make it produce aisle. Outside, the courtyard receives her as if it has been rehearsing. The escort forms. A carriage waits with the kind of simple lines that scream, official. She doesn't take it. She mounts a small, steady horse, the sort used by messengers and women who have no interest in flipping skirts for posterity. Someone somewhere is disappointed. There will be no cinematic departure. You are not. Quiet is sharper. Mainstream fact, before you lose her to the gate, medieval queens did go into exile. Margaret of Anjou found herself shuttled between sanctuaries and coasts. Isabella of France navigated power with a crown she sometimes wore sideways. Eleanor of Aquitaine survived imprisonment to outlast most of her enemies. Queens endure by learning when to be louder than law and when to be softer than rumor. The portcullis lifts, the horse takes the world in small, precise steps. She doesn't look back because that's a luxury, not a strategy. The west light slides off the tapestry. The serpents resume their nap, and the hall exhales like a lung that has remembered its job. The crown, judged by the head, continues to gleam on a table where anyone could mistake it for a centerpiece. The secrets stay, stitched, perfumed, hummed, outliving their owners the way walls outlive voices. You remain, a shadow with rosemary on your coat, listening to the palace relearn ordinary time. Somewhere above, a cat knocks something off a ledge, and the future lands with a small, purposeful thud. Word count, 1082. Wind down, 300 words. The palace grows quieter the way snow falls, soft, deliberate, each flake its own hush. You let your breath lengthen to match it. In through the easy place behind the eyes, out through the loosened jaw, and the stones seem to settle with you. The corridors are simply corridors again, not conspirators, and the tapestry is only warmth on a cold wall. It's gold sleepy, its serpents drifting into woven dreams. You imagine the queen's horse taking that careful road, hooves choosing smaller sounds, the rosemary in her cloak pocket sighing each time the breeze remembers it. The market shutters come down, one, then another, and the city's last bowls are dried and set upside down like little moons along the hearth. The lullaby from the tower recedes to a thread, then to a knot, then to a silence that is not empty but held. The way a book closes around a secret without crushing it. If you look back over the night, the pieces reappear at a slower pace, friendlier now. The chessboard with its hollow pawn, the lace with its shy looped knot, the nun who moved like water through a chapel, the falcon's lift into dark, the fish glue shimmer of gold thread, the onions waiting in their basket with comic patience. They nod as they pass, as if to say, It was enough. You did fine. You can sleep. Let the rooms fade into shapes, then into gentle weights behind your eyes. Let the jokes soften until they're only small ripples at the edge of a pond. If a worry tries to wedge itself in the door, give it a task. Count 7, pause, 3, 2, and it will find that it has run out of reasons to stay awake. The fan hum you chose at the start of the night becomes the palace breathing, then becomes your breathing, then becomes the kind of silence that holds rather than hides. You have walked the corridors, and they have walked you back to bed. Rest easy. The west light will find its wall without you, and the moon will be punctual.